Hello, and probably pretty obviously, I'm Liam O'Mara, and in this video I want to examine the part played by mass media in webs of social control. And I'll show places where its particular interests and the interests of those that own it affect what it says and does. None of this rant is meant to say that important stories are not reported in the media. They are. Plenty of good people are working to present important material for our edification. But many things are left out, too, and I want to show why that is. So, let's start with some disclaimers. First, I'll mention that my parrot may make some noise that might come into the video here. I'm not sure. He's certainly audible to me, but that's cute. Okay, so let's secondarily say that this video presents my own analysis and that of some experts I feel have something useful to add. And I'll take some clear editorial positions in it, such as upholding the dignity and autonomy of peoples everywhere. And this means that I will be criticizing unequal power relations by default as impediments to human freedom. Take that as you will. You're perfectly free to disagree and to dispense with any of that editorializing, and I don't think it'll impact the meaning of this much. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to believe or why you should believe it. That is, quite honestly, never the purpose of education. All I hope to do here, as in my classes as a whole, is offer up tools and insight that might help you down whatever path you choose. Higher education is not about enforcing conformity. It's not an indoctrination factory, but about preparing you to think for yourself. And this little rant on media is offered up in that spirit. Okay. Mass media has many roles. It serves to inform, to entertain, to control. One of its main and somewhat hidden functions is to instill acceptance of societal norms. By this I mean the promotion of essential shared social values and codes of behavior. This is especially important for those things we might naturally reject as children, whatever, things like inequalities, hierarchies, warfare, hunger, poverty, etc. Children seem reflexively to reject things like this when they encounter them. Now, revolts and political disruptions were extremely common in the past. Mass media helps greatly to reduce these. If we think that everyone else accepts something, we're more likely to do so. But reducing conflict has also reduced innovation, autonomy, liberty. Media and capital have acted in concert to create an inverted totalitarianism inside an illusion of freedom. Inverted totalitarianism, a term originated by Sheldon Wolin, subverts the classic military dictatorship. It substitutes private power through corporations for pure state power. In classic fascism, for example, the state commanded corporate obedience, to some degrees. Inverted totalitarianism places the state at the service of capital interests, and media sells all of this with the lie of freedom. Think about how representative democracy is meant to work. You express your views and find others who share them, right? Then you work to elect people who will express your views. Those in power are supposed to listen to the people they represent, but they don't. A meta-study at Princeton and Northwestern universities examined 2,000 public opinion polls. It found that an idea supported by 100% of the people had a 30% chance of passing into law. And the same was true of an idea opposed by 100% of the people, still a 30% chance of passing into law. Public opinion thus plays no part in shaping law and policy. So, what does? Simply put, and this is something that comes up in a lot of my classes, money buys influence, especially in the U.S. Yes, to a slightly lesser degree in other democracies, but it's there as well. And this works in two main ways. The first is direct access to power. Campaign donations equal access to candidates and influence over their choices. Most legislation, in fact, is written by corporate lobbyists and oligarch-funded think tanks. Many of the people in Congress voting for them have not actually read them. That's been common for decades now. The second is through control of opinion. You may be tempted to think the First Amendment grants freedom of speech. But those with money can make their speech heard and prevent yours from being heard. And there are both direct and indirect ways this occurs. I'll give you 3 ways and address them in more detail later. I'll work through these. First, they can get laws changed. Laws infringing on political liberty have been common since the 18th century here. Second, they can influence media through advertising. Media will not critique the capitalist system or harm corporate interests as a whole. And third, they can purchase and direct the media outright. Media are, after all, mostly privately owned and represent their owners' views. So let's take that first one apart. The U.S., we are told, is supposedly founded on things like opposition to taxation without representation. The first major tax protests, though, were violently suppressed, and just 5% of the population was able to vote in early elections. There was, realistically, no more representation for most Americans in the new republic than there was under Britain in the colonies. In fact, personal liberty declined sharply in the new republic. The colonial administrations had interfered far less in Americans' lives and morals. They were too far away and didn't really care. And the second presidential administration here actually passed a law making it a crime to criticize the president. Laws have frequently suppressed opinions here. Literature on slavery abolition or anti-capitalism were once banned in this country, for example. Now, of course, the U.S. was not created as a democracy. It grew more democratic because ordinary people worked together to force change. Mass media has made it easier to manufacture consensus and suppress organizing, though. So with technological developments, the diversity of opinion actually declined sharply. Popular democracy became associated with enemies or enemy ideologies. The Cold War was, in fact, a key litmus test for American democracy, and it failed. Unions faced violent assaults. Socialist ideas and organizing were outlawed, and popular concepts were associated with communism, like civil rights and anti-colonial discourses. These are harmed by association with the Marxist enemy. You may have seen like that, just some famous protest photos with people holding up signs saying race mixing is communism. What? So opposition to segregation somehow becomes connected to the Soviet Union. Dependence on advertising to support operations creates another problem. Editorial oversight cannot allow content that imperils revenue streams. Thus, basic features of corporate power cannot be discussed. Material that is embarrassing to most industries is routinely axed, and material making advertisers happy is sadly encouraged. This goes so far as to permit use of corporate press releases as news. The tighter margins get, the fewer reporters, the more dependence on ready-made content from government and corporations. And as we'll discuss later, media consolidation amplifies this effect. Advertising contributes to a propaganda model of news, and it also reduces the available serious news. Studies showed that tackling difficult topics affected the impact of the advertising. If people are depressed or thoughtful, consumption is not foremost in mind. Advertisers thus apply pressure to make the news entertaining. It is meant to stimulate the correct emotions, and frankly, the interests of the poorest Americans will just disappear in that. They're not important consumers. Successfully keeping advertisers happy helped to accelerate media consolidation. Major corporations with diverse interests bought up media outlets. If your corporate daddy produces nuclear weapons, do you run a documentary discussing their dangers? Or do you run light entertainment to distract from those dangers? So let's get to that third element, the direct ownership of media. Most of it is owned by wealthy families and multinational corporations. Those with the ability to buy a way to amplify their voice often do. Today, almost all of what we see and hear comes from the same places. The same content, in fact, is used in dozens of places where tons of local networks will have been bought up, and then they present the same material. Ben Bagdikian published the first edition of The Media Monopoly in 1983. He sounded an alarm when 50 corporations controlled media. Now, mind you, this includes newspapers, magazines, radio and television stations, book publishers, and movie studios. Lots of media. As of the most recent edition of his work, the number is 5. Yes, 5 corporations control 90% of what you can see. Diversity of opinion is thus largely an illusion. In the 19th century, a vibrant free press developed, and in it, voices of common people could be shared. Capital interests got involved, lowered the cost of their content, and crushed the radical press. Competition was useful when it meant eliminating views that threatened elite interests, but once the voices from below were drowned out, competition became less important. Media no longer exist to challenge the powerful. They seem to do at times, but this is deceptive. Criticizing one side of the political dyad in the U.S., for example, does not challenge the paradigm itself. Reporting a scandal in one elite party or other then only serves the other elite party. It doesn't challenge that system. Such reporting creates an illusion of impartiality. It seems to be critical to be attacking a social evil, to be reporting the facts, but some subjects are okay to discuss as they don't threaten the overall system, and others are not. For example, reporting on scandals around, say, Donald Trump is permissible as it targets one party, not the system. Reporting that the U.S. government engages in routine war crimes under presence of both parties is not permissible. Anything that embarrasses the party system itself is largely inadmissible. Critique of one or the other leaves the system strong and creates an illusion of impartiality. But when was the last time you saw major media taking small parties seriously? When was the last time you saw major media call out, say, the profit system, or the wage system, or the political party system, or policing as a concept, warfare as a general thing that happens? I don't mean like bad apples, bad wars, bad police. I mean like the whole basket. I mean criticizing the institutions or concepts. The forces shaping U.S. media are subtle. They're organic. They seem to produce diverse perspectives, but it's all geared toward the same ends, the same basic narratives. There are 2 political parties, and thus only 2 options. The police exist to serve and protect the public. Private enterprise means freedom. Heard things like this probably all your life. Maximizing profit means reducing diversity of opinion, directing us to advertisers, cultivating brand loyalties. Some papers and stations will thus more often express one party's political views, and other papers and stations will more often express the other party's political views. Views from outside the dyad will be mocked if discussed at all, and criticism of the system itself never appears. It's thus fair to say U.S. media follows a propaganda model that filters information that's contrary to elite interests. Even where trust in media is low, the lack of options outside the main sources keep the ball rolling. Lots of so-called independent media, too, have the same sources and the same bosses. Look at how big podcasts and streamers are funded. Much comes from advertising and donations by think tanks and oligarchs. So, the original diversity of the press came apart as the technology itself raised barriers to entry. When large printing presses, or radio transmitters, or television stations, when these appear, the costs become prohibitive. It's hard to get into it at all, hard to compete, hard to keep the same kind of prices as the market is currently providing. This meant all voices would inevitably be right-wing, i.e. in favor of private property and ownership. You want worker ownership? Do you oppose the wage system? Good luck affording the equipment needed to be heard. Now, do exceptions exist? Of course, and by design, a small opposition is tolerated. There are voices on the internet that challenge dominant narratives, but they're generally marginalized. Algorithms will keep their reach low. A lack of advertising or big donations lowers their quality, which kind of makes truly independent content boring. I mean, I'll be the first to point to my own content as fundamentally boring. So one key here lies in the need to think about it then. How many people want to look at a scientist or a professor talking about an issue? No original graphics, no animations, no video cutaways, no theme music. And what of the content itself? What will get more views? A video about France with French perspectives, or one about Nigeria with Nigerian voices? We tend to go to what's familiar. Media favors what we are more likely already to know something about. It'll talk about local issues or about countries we've heard of. When ones outside common knowledge are discussed, it's often in the context of a disaster or some critique, some way to point to some flaw in some other place. You know, we'll hear all about the evils of the Cuban government, the evils of the Iranian government, and we don't hear about the evils of the British government, which has done far more harm to the world. The perspectives you will get all come from a set of elite interests. The perspectives of the victims of Western power generally do not merit consideration. We are subtly taught, therefore, that there are worthy and unworthy victims. Are Christians being killed in Nigeria? We'll hear about it. Are Muslims being killed in Central African Republic? Crickets. The most lethal terrorist organization in the world, in history, is Christian. But how often is Christian terrorism discussed compared with, say, Islamic terrorism? It's frankly not in American media. Whether the media cares about any given issue depends largely on the perpetrator of the attack and or on the victim's race or nationality. You'll also see this in the kind of language that gets used. So, for example, if there's a terror attack in Israel and Palestine carried out by a Jewish figure, you generally won't see the word terrorist used in American media. I've actually done extensive studies of major events of terrorism that leave that out and just call them like lone wolves or something else. You know, another like broader issue, the violence of colonialism itself has always been downplayed or celebrated. It used to be much more celebrated, and that continues to the present day, and also covers the violence of major corporations. How often do you hear about Shell or Coca-Cola or Chiquita funding death squads, paramilitaries that kill, like labor organizers or indigenous people? The free market directs us to higher production values, to greater entertainment value, and to comforting familiarity. It manipulates our emotions, uses our confirmation biases, and discourages us from feeling empowered. Listen to the experts that we choose. Pay attention to issues that matter, ones we choose. Don't think about what happened to bring you these products that paid for this content. Never think about who's paying for something. Attempts to break out of this system are swiftly punished. Journalists who tried to report embarrassing material were discredited and cut off from funding. Television networks that discussed corporate malpractice in the Global South lost advertisers. Lots of brand names give an illusion of diversity because the pressure is subtle. It's easy to pretend the media is free. But in truth, large swathes of content is provided directly by government and corporations. When the U.S. wanted to go to war with Iraq, the media shared the official line 24/7. Lawmakers in both parties knew the weapons of mass destruction stuff was a lie, and the media did not call them on it. It amplified the lie. In the aftermath, the scapegoats were blamed, not the system itself. It's like we're consciously choosing not to learn anything from this stuff too. Think about the current war in Iran. You've got tons of talking heads on all the different stations all talking about this across the spectrum of opinion. And they're all presenting people who say, Iranian regime evil, war good, this has to happen, something like this has to happen. And you don't get a lot of serious engagement on why, or where the current Iranian government came from, or really the fact that we're responsible for its existence in the first place through previous regime change wars. Broad media narratives are used to structure the content that we see. These can change over time, but all are created to support the interests of the powerful. We have to stop the spread of communism. We need to defeat the terrorist threat. We must crush the drug cartels. What we don't see in any of this feverish reporting is thoughtful material challenging basic assumptions behind the narrative. Communism was never a threat to Americans or the free world. Terrorism is a predictable response to policy decisions. Drug cartels are powerful because of prohibition. Fear is a powerful tool of elite control, so enemies must be created. And we're not meant to peek behind the curtain and see what's really going on, or how to solve these problems. Hannah Arendt showed us that totalitarian systems depend upon internal and external enemies. Both sets of enemies must be manufactured, and media is really useful for this. Both sets of enemies must seem like awful threats, but neither can pose any real risk. If you're worried about subversive elements or hostile foreigners, you won't look up at who is served by your fear. You know, when told to hate someone, ask who that hate benefits. It's always good to peek behind the curtain and see the wizard. Conspiracy theories, for example, are really useful to media and to the state. And targets can change with cultures, with generations, with utility. So, is it the Jews, Catholics, Muslims, immigrants, socialists, anti-fascists? Fears about terrorism, cartels, immigrants, communists, and so on, they distract and divide. We all choose sides in a rigged game where the only answer is benefit the ruling class. In addition, we can easily be told that certain countries are our enemies. Media is useful for whipping up support for attacks on, as I said before, Iran, but also Venezuela, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Grenada, and on and on and on. The U.S. has two friendly neighbors and two big oceans protecting it, yet somehow Americans are among the most xenophobic and fearful anywhere in the democratic world. We empower a massive security state to protect us. And often from what? The U.S. has 18 distinct intelligence agencies, 18, and an extraordinary surveillance system, rivaled really only by China. It has the most violent and corrupt police departments in the developed world, and sadly to say, police seize more assets than all thieves combined. It spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined, and these assets have been used against workers and to suppress dissent. People who have taken my U.S. history class will have seen tons of examples of military and police force being used against workers. The old totalitarianisms, the classic era, earlier in the 20th century, focused on the power of the state, as in like Nazi Germany or the Stalinist USSR. The new totalitarianisms focus on the creation of more a managed democracy. Such a system places the power of the state effectively under the control of a corporate elite. It will have democratic forms, like elections and a free media, but both are hollowed out, in Sheldon Woolman's term. His work on this shows that sovereign political power is largely out of our reach. Remember that statistic from before that showed your actual political views have no impact on government? The modern citizen is treated as a consumer, not as a political agent. We're given options that the elite can live with and made to choose between them. This is often like choosing brands in the supermarket. Most competitors are owned by the same conglomerates, so choice there is largely an illusion. I'm sure some of you have seen those big infographics out there that show like the corporate parent of tons and tons of the brands that we see, so you see just how few companies are really involved in owning all of this diversity of products that we have. So effectively, we're given a choice between a cynical disengagement or passive collaboration. If we feel the system is rigged, we tune out, and the meta-narrative wins. If we feel our participation is meaningful, we engage on their terms, and the meta-narrative still wins. Does this make things hopeless? I mean, far from it, but there are challenges ahead. Local organizing, for example, really matters, as does how we respond to openings presented by circumstances or history. The easiest potential disruptions seem to come from profound crises like the Great Depression. This, when it happened, allowed some scope for wider political participation, for outside voices, but even here, the new policies kept the basics of the old system intact. The New Deal did not challenge the profit system or the party system or anything else really about it. It just took care of some of the fallout from their mistakes. But its opening to greater participation and efforts to reduce poverty were still seen as a threat. So those sources of hope had to be destroyed, and decades have been spent doing that. So, since I've already mentioned him, Sheldon Wolin tells us that the American political system was not born a democracy, but born with a bias against democracy. It was constructed by those who were either skeptical about democracy or hostile to it. Democratic advance proved to be slow, uphill, forever incomplete. The Republic existed for 3/4 of a century before formal slavery was ended, another 100 years before black Americans were assured of their voting rights. Only in the 20th century were women guaranteed the vote and trade unions the right to bargain collectively. And in none of these instances has victory been complete. Women still lack full equality, racism persists, and the destruction of the remnants of trade unions remains a goal of corporate strategies. Far from being innate, democracy in America has gone against the grain, against the very forms by which the political and economic power of the country had been and continues to be ordered. Whew, and long quote. The media system serves an inverted totalitarianism by fostering divisions among the people. If the public are divided along racial lines, gender lines, religious lines, and so on, they're no threat to the ruling class. Unlike in classic totalitarianism, we're not made to serve a single nation-state's interests. Instead, we serve a disparate group of identities, brands, factions that all share common interests. The goal is to keep us subservient without our recognizing that fact. Now, dissent must be present throughout the media. It must look like there are multiple sides to a dispute and that one or the other is right, that dissent is carefully curated and managed. Opposition must be tamed and impotent. Hating or defending disadvantaged groups suppresses class identities. Therefore, it's often seen as useful. And above all, class-conscious intersectionality must be prevented. I'll come back to one of those words in a bit. Mass media is meant to guide us, to mold us. It is part of a complex web that Michel Foucault calls governmentality. Modern states use complex but dispersed techniques to shape our subjectivity. We are taught to stay within certain bounds, what ideas and identities are acceptable, and ultimately we enforce the system on ourselves. If you can convince a people they are free within a hierarchical society, they'll enslave themselves to it. We are regulated largely through the cultivation of hegemonic discourses. We'll fall into certain approved identities. We will reinforce behavioral norms on ourselves and on others. Our normative gaze will affect others and how they feel. Foucault's panopticism shows us that force is seldom needed to command obedience. Conformity is better ensured subtly, almost invisibly. Consider things like the elf-on-the-shelf product. Children are taught that it's watching and will report on their behavior. Let Santa know if they're a good girl or bad girl, good boy, bad boy. And thus, they're conditioned into obedience with no one actually watching them. We all grow up this way, shaped by social norms, conditioned into acceptable forms, and this reduces the need for overt force. Now, to be sure, violence always stands behind the veil. The rule of force is there for whenever we get out of line, through laws and punishments and so on. But it's far more efficient, far more economical to domesticate a population. So, education systems, social campaigns, civil society groups, surveillance systems, and, yes, the mass media do that work. We're taught to think and act within certain boundaries. Media plays a vital role indoctrinating us to accept an unequal society, economically, racially, nationally, and so on. It also fosters a learned helplessness, stripping us of agency and telling us others will speak for us. Stories in the media need to support the dominant meta-narrative so the ruling class is never threatened. Countless major problems could be solved easily, but only by disadvantaging that elite. Such solutions, thus, cannot be reported. We have tons of things. The drug war, global warming / climate change, terrorism. Tons of these things could be eliminated easily, but we cannot have those conversations. Now, we all have our place within this unfair, unequal system and are taught to accept that. The ways to resist it are conveniently suppressed. As Woolen says, quoting again, the entrenched system of bribery and corruption involves not physical violence, no brown-shirted stormtroopers, no coercion of the political opposition. While the tactics are not those of the Nazis, the end result is the inverted equivalent. Opposition had not been liquidated, but rendered feckless, useless. I don't want to leave you feeling hopeless, though, after ranting for half an hour here. That some perspectives, some binaries are elevated to such status as to be reified does not make them permanent. I should note reification is taking an abstract concept and treating it like a concrete reality. We are, for example, taught that the economy is a thing existing outside ourselves, with laws of nature that govern it, and thus forget that it's something we just made up. So, how do you challenge the domination of mass media and the hegemonic states and corporations behind it? Whatever your own politics, and mine are not like his, Antonio Gramsci has a suggestion. Thinking in terms of his war of position means a struggle must happen within civil society to change minds. And this happens in schools and houses of worship and clubs. It allows ideas to spread organically, person to person. To whom you speak also matters. Intersectionality describes the way that social identities like race, gender, class, and so on overlap and intersect. Some combinations reflect privilege and power within a given system, and others reflect oppressed or suppressed voices. And one path to challenging dominant social structures is to ally with other subaltern identities. At the end of the day, mass media are useful, but they must be understood for what they are. We can get real value out of media so long as we are conscious of the factors that influence its editorial decisions. Consider what's being left out in the stories we see, what is not being said. Consider the interests of the institutions that are quoted uncritically. Consider why some experts are cited and not others. Like, we'll get those pro-war voices, we won't get a lot of the anti-war voices, and it won't be as presented as clearly. So, above all, I'd like to say, please don't surrender to a sense of like hopelessness or helplessness. I'm not trying to depress you. If there's anything that history tells me, it's that no paradigm stands forever. People once believed that kings were appointed by God and could not be questioned. People once believed that Jews were causing diseases, that witches were spreading satanic control, that storms were caused by angry gods. Most of us, fortunately, no longer believe such things. In this modern media age, and under the nation-state's government mentality, we're taught to stay in our own lanes. A kind of apathy is fostered in us, a sense that experts, lobbyists, politicians, and CEOs, they know better. We are taught to be politically disengaged to some extent, to turn up for occasional votes, maybe a rally, a meeting, something like that, but that's really it. Actual democracy, though, it comes from below and requires us to talk to one another. It's not something we turn to elites for. It requires us to stop treating each other as enemies and actually engage. This long ramble has hoped to show that mass media are not objective sources. And really, in truth, no source of information is objective because true objectivity is out of human reach. Knowing that the mass media is shaped by profit motives and elite interests can help us to read between the lines. And we can educate ourselves on those lacunae, those left-out spaces. We can learn from each other, and there's a kind of power in that. We're not threatened from the outside, from some enemy country or untrustworthy minority. American democracy is crumbling from within because the system itself is filled with threats. It's filled with pitfalls and traps. The state has become an instrument of corporate control, but it cannot enforce conformity or submission against our collective will. our participation in the system is needed, and therein lies a choice and one space wherein freedom yet lives. So hopefully this was helpful, useful in some way, in whatever you believe and whatever you want to do. Good luck.